Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. I'm your host, Jon Jeune. Lovely to be here with you guys. Beautiful, beautiful Tuesday morning. Hope you guys are all doing well. Again, make sure you are tapped in, plugged into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, whether you are watching on YouTube, Twitch, X, Instagram, wherever you may be watching it. Make sure you got those notifications on. Make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, especially. We're trying to get our subscribers up to 200 on YouTube, guys. So spread the word. If you're watching, you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. Would genuinely appreciate it. Also, make sure if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, make sure you are subscribed there as well, wherever you may be listening, wherever you get your podcast. Now, Tuesday morning means it's waivers. Hopefully you guys kick some butt in your fantasy matchups over this past weekend. There was quite a bit of high scores, lots of big fantasy performances, especially at the wide receiver position. So hopefully you guys were on the right side of that. But hopefully if whether you are coming off a big win or you are coming off a loss, going to try to get you right going into week 6 here. So again, week 6 fantasy football waiver wire show, and let's just jump right into it. Now, normally we do hit the guys that are above that 50% threshold in terms of availability according to Yahoo leagues. However, with the quarterback position, I figured let's include some guys that are probably a little bit outside of that threshold. It is, we do have 4 teams on bye this week between the Kansas City Chiefs, Los Angeles Rams, the Miami Dolphins, and Minnesota Vikings. Now, possibly 2 or maybe 3 of those teams, you probably were, only were concerned about the quarterbacks from those teams. The Miami Dolphins, I doubt that anyone's really starting Tyler Huntley outside of like your 16, 18, 20 team leagues or in, some deep super flex leagues. So that being said, including some guys that are probably outside of that threshold there, just so, I want to bring attention to them there. And then we do have I think one player at the running back position that is outside that threshold as well. And we'll talk about that as we get through the end of the show. But also, if you are watching live, just make sure, if you have a question, put it in the comments, whether it's a waiver question, a drop candidate that you may have. I want to look at some scenarios that, are real. So, feel free to reach out. Again, in the comment section. In the future, always feel free to shoot a DM over with the question, and I'll definitely do my best to get it answered live on the show. If that's like a who should I drop, or should I drop this player to pick up that player, so on and so forth. Be more than happy to get those answered on the show. But let's jump into the quarterback position, and starting with Atlanta quarterback Kirk Cousins, available 49% of Yahoo leagues. We talked about Kirk Cousins last week before his big performance, but now he's coming off a season best 34 fantasy points, where we saw 500 passing yards to go along with 4 touchdowns. He's now matched up against the Carolina defense that has now given up 20-plus fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks in 3 of their last 5 games. Speaking of Carolina defense, Caleb Williams, Chicago Bears quarterback Caleb Williams, available in 40% of Yahoo leagues, coming off his best fantasy game of this season against that same Carolina defense, and now gets to face a Jacksonville defense that has been just hemorrhaging fantasy points to the quarterback position. Coming into week 5, they allowed the most fantasy points to the quarterback position, and I'm pretty sure that would stay constant after we crunch the numbers uh, for for week 6 over these last 3 weeks. So they've allowed actually Jacksonville has allowed 3 straight outings of at least 26 and a half PPR points to fantasy points to the quarterback position over over the last 3 games there. So definitely, Caleb Williams has been a up and down season for him. We've had some really big passing performances, 2 games of over 300 yards. But we've also had some uh, pretty less than stellar passing performances here from Caleb Williams. But the 2 things that you can notice if you look back is that those big passing performances, they came against some of the weaker pass defenses, some of the weaker defenses to the quarterback position in Carolina and Indianapolis. So he's got a great matchup on deck against Jacksonville. I think it's wheels up this week for Caleb Williams. Moving on to Indianapolis, quarterback Joe Flacco, available in 92% of Yahoo leagues. Now, there's a small chance that Richardson doesn't play again, and if he doesn't, this is a decent spot here for Joe Flacco, who's coming off a week against Jacksonville, who we just talked about, sensing a theme here. But he's going to then face a Tennessee defense that's given up on average 17.8 fantasy points over their last 3 games to the quarterback position. Combine that with the fact that the Indianapolis defense on the other side is one to attack. That could mean Flacco needs to remain aggressive with how bad this Indianapolis defense can be and has been. Moving on to the next quarterback on the list, that is New York Giants quarterback Daniel Jones, available in 91% of Yahoo leagues, coming off his best performance of the season, and that was without his top wideout in Malik Neighbors. He's now scored 18 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. The best part about the last game is for the fact, or I guess for me, is the fact that Jones rushed 11 times in this last game, which signals he might be getting a little bit healthier coming off that torn ACL from last year. And that's just in time for a matchup with Cincinnati, who have now allowed at least 16.7 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. Daniel Jones, obviously, he has the rushing upside. If he can continue to be if he can continue to use his legs there, that's going to add a significant floor to Daniel Jones's game. And as we talk about some of these other rushing quarterbacks like Justin Fields, who's surprise we're not talking about today, but we talk about the ceiling being there for these guys in an event that they have to play from behind, right? They're going to make plays with their legs and also throw the ball aggressively down the field, right? So that could be this week against Cincinnati, albeit Cincinnati has struggled as a whole, but anything is possible, right? So let's move on to the next position. That's the running back position, with a guy that we've talked about quite a bit. And it finally came to fruition. Jacksonville running back Tank Bigsby, available in 77% of Yahoo leagues. It only took 5 weeks, but finally Bigsby paid off with a big game. Led the Jags in rush attempts and rushing with 101 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Also turned his only target into an explosive 28-yard reception. It's unclear if him playing over ETN was purely injury related or if this will continue. But either way, he needs to be rostered, especially with a matchup on deck against the Chicago Bears, who coming into week 5 were a top 12 matchup for opposing running backs. Bigsby is a guy that if you've been listening for, since week 1, we've been talking about him. I think we talked about him in the waiver show every week, but 1 week. That might have been the week he was injured. But Bigsby, as I talked about last week on the waiver show, this is possible that he could take over this backfield. Maybe not fully take it over, but he can demand a larger role, right? If you look at, the Jags they're struggling, or they were struggling. They just got their first win against the Colts on Sunday. But they are primed to do whatever they can to try to win football games, right? You've got coaches that are fighting for their jobs, right? Doug Peterson and the general manager there, I forget his name, but they drafted Tank Bixby. They did not draft Travis Etienne. So there's more incentive for them to see what Tank Bigsby is about, as he is really actually one of their guys. Where they inherited Travis Etienne. That's not to say they don't like Travis Etienne. That's not to say Travis Etienne's a bad player. But with how well Tank Bigsby has played over these last few weeks, I mean, he's flashed almost every opportunity he's had to get on the football field and get touches. So it's only been a matter of time until they are going to have to start giving him a longer look, especially when what was happening prior to this past week in week 5 wasn't leading to the outcome of winning football games. So Tank Bigsby, I think, has earned a larger role. He'll continue to have a larger role. And if you played him in week 5, more power to you, because I was desperate and I did. And 27.9 PPR points, I will gladly take. Moving on to the next running back on this list, the one guy who is above the 50% threshold or below the 50% threshold, however you want to say it, that is Baltimore running back, or Dallas running back rather, Rico Dowdle, available in 44% of Yahoo leagues. Don't look now, but we might have landed on a useful fantasy running back in Dallas. Dowdle now has back-to-back weeks with double-digit PPR points and a touchdown. But for the first time all season against Pittsburgh in week 5, he hit 20 rush attempts and 100 yards from scrimmage. His next matchup against Detroit, not particularly great, but if he continues to see the kind of volume that he saw in week 5, then he needs to be rostered, and then he will also then probably need to find his way into your lineup as an RB2, RB3 type of play. So again, I know the availability is not that high in terms of availability in Yahoo leagues, but just take a look in your league. Maybe he's sitting there, maybe he's made available, could have been dropped potentially after the first couple weeks of the season. But Dowdle's a guy that plays in this good offense here in Dallas. We're definitely going to want to be able to, roster him and potentially play him in a good offensive environment. The next running back on this list, New York Giants running back Tyrone Tracy Jr., available in 77% of Yahoo leagues. Now, we talked about Tracy, was it last week? No, it was 2 weeks ago in the week 4 waiver show. We talked about picking him up ahead of Thursday Night Football, seeing how that might, if he could garner a larger role within the offense. And that didn't actually really come to fruition, but no harm, no foul there. Tracy got the start in week 5 with Singletary out of the game here, and he was highly efficient, rushing for 129 yards on 18 carries against the Seattle Seahawks. I'm not sure what the status is on Singletary, but Tracy kind of can't be put back in the box now. I'd add him to teams in need of running back help. Obviously, I'm always of the frame of mind, like, fill your bench with as many backup running backs in committees as you can, because you never know what's going to happen. Running backs are one of the most injury prone position in football. They're granted to miss at least 1 or 2 games a year, almost guaranteed. So it makes sense to have these guys on your bench in the event that something happens, and one of these guys, like Tyrone Tracy here, does something so well that his team and his coaching staff can't just put him back in the box and be like, hey, we're not going to play this. We can't afford to play this guy. Like, you can't afford not to play him, right? So Tyrone Tracy, I think, needs to be rostered, again, available in 77% of Yahoo leagues. He needs to be added. Next running back on this list, these next 2 are on bye, but they definitely need to be added considering the situations surrounding them. First one is Minnesota running back Ty Chandler, available in 72% of Yahoo leagues. Aaron Jones injured his hip in London, which led to Ty Chandler seeing a season high 14 rush attempts and 16 total opportunities. Chandler split some time with our old friend Miles Gaskin, Mr. Necessary, while also seating, or actually he was the gas man. I think Wayne Gallman was Mr. Necessary, but besides the point, also seating a goal line opportunity to CJ Ham, who operates as the team's fullback essentially. But as I mentioned a few weeks back, this offensive staff is well aware of Chandler's skill set and what he's capable of. If Jones has to miss some time, I expect Chandler to take on a bulk of the work in this backfield. The Vikings are on bye week this week, so you would have to stash Ty Chandler through week 6. He cannot help you in week 6. He would be a play for week 7, which obviously means that you would have to monitor the availability of Minnesota running back Aaron Jones for this next couple weeks. And obviously, because the Minnesota Vikings are on bye, they don't have to give us a report up until the following week here. So we won't get much of an answer. Maybe there's folks out there that have a prognostication on Aaron Jones. There's a lot of good injury analysts in the fantasy community. Jeff Mueller was one of the really good ones. Edwin Toros also very good. So two guys that I definitely will be looking at their pages and seeing what they have to say in regards to the situation here with Aaron Jones. Moving on to the next running back, who's again also on bye. Miami running back Jalen Wright, available in 92% of Yahoo leagues. This is a look-ahead edition again, off waivers. The Dolphins are on bye this week, so Jalen Wright won't be able to help you in week 6. However, with Achane and concussion protocol and Wilson still dealing with his injury, Wright is set up to split some time with Raheem Mostert, who's coming off his own injury. Again, Wright saw final significant opportunities in this game, running 13 times for 86 yards. He's got this big playability similar to Achane, similar to what Mostert has, but Mostert's a little bit older, obviously. But Wilson is a little bit different than Achane, right? Achane is a little bit smaller, obviously has explosive speed, but Jalen Wright is like 215, 220 almost. He's got 4.4 speed, home run ability here. So I think he's a great fit in this Miami Dolphins offense. Granted, the offensive environment not particularly great right now with the injury to Tua, and they haven't really found a quarterback that's been able to truly be productive for them here. But given that they're going to have to find ways to score points and generate offense, I think Jalen Wright will be a part of that, assuming he assumes a larger role in the backfield. So again, depending on the status of Achane, it's possible that Wright could play a pivotal role going forward in this backfield in week 7, especially against an Indianapolis defense that just in general struggles defensively. Moving on to the wide receiver position, Indianapolis wide receiver Josh Downs, available in 60% of Yahoo leagues. Downs now has 21 targets over his last 2 games, leading the Colts with 12 targets on Sunday. Now, most of his opportunities are in that short area of the field, but in PPR leagues, that's the type of stuff that's great for us, right? We don't necessarily, targets are better, if not as good. Targets are better than rush attempts, right? So, the same way we say, in half PPR leagues, or just running back position in general, we're looking for those opportunities, right? In PPR leagues, what we care about mostly is like how many targets is this guy getting, because the more targets he gets, the more opportunities he can catch the football, especially these guys like Josh Downs who operate in that short area of the field, who are seeing a higher percentage pass attempts, which means higher percentage chance that they catch those pass attempts. So the more targets, higher percentage leads to more receptions. And so that's stuff, we love here as in terms of PPR leagues. So if Flacco gets to start again, that's a plus for Downs. But I think his role is here to stay, even if Richardson comes back into the lineup. I just, you know, I hate to say this about Anthony Richardson, but he kind of just sucks up the entire offensive environment around him, right? He's going to steal not just those rush attempts from guys like, Jonathan Taylor, and those goal line opportunities potentially from a guy like Jonathan Taylor, but he's also capping the upside of this pass game with his inability to consistently get the ball to his receivers like a Josh Downs or a Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Adonai Mitchell, so on and so forth. So if Flacco is the quarterback, we obviously like this a little bit more for the offensive environment surrounding the quarterback. But if Richardson is the guy, I think Downs still has a role. Unfortunately, I feel like Pittman would be the one to suffer in that instance. Moving on to the next wide receiver on this list, Atlanta wide receiver Darnell Mooney, available in 52% of Yahoo leagues. Mooney has been on a pretty decent stretch over the last 4 weeks with 3 double-digit outings during that stretch. His best performance was by far on Thursday night when he saw a whopping 16 targets, which he turned into 9 receptions for 105 receiving yards to go along with 2 touchdown receptions. He's a regular part of this offense and has a matchup against Carolina, who, coming into week 5, allowed the 8th most PPR points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 matchups here. So Darnell Mooney, definitely a guy that I think needs to be added. Next guy on this list, Dallas wide receiver Jalen Tolbert, available in 93% of Yahoo leagues. However, as I was typing this up, he was not available in any of my Yahoo leagues. So there goes that. Tolbert is starting to seem like a legitimate thing in this Dallas offense. He's seen double-digit fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, and now has seen double-digit targets for the first time, catching 7 for 87 and a game-winning touchdown. With Brandon Cooks on injured reserve, it seems that Tolbert will continue to operate as the number 2 receiver in Dallas, just in time here for a matchup against a Detroit defense that, coming into week 5, allowed the 5th most PPR points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 matchups. So Tolbert, definitely a guy I think worth a look off the waiver wire and deserves an opportunity to find his way into your lineup with this potentially explosive Dallas offense. The next guy on this list, the last guy we'll talk about at the wide receiver position, Arizona wide receiver Michael Wilson, available in 87% of Yahoo leagues. Wilson has seen at least 6 targets over his last 3 games and is scoring double digits in 2 of them. He saw a season high in receiving yardage and now gets a matchup against a Green Bay defense that, coming into the week, allowed the 14th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 matchups. Obviously, I shouted out Wilson a couple weeks ago. He completely flopped. So in true fashion, he had to come out with his best performance of the year in week 5. So after making him a start of the week in week 4, so definitely like Wilson, I have liked his prospects, coming into the season, and again, I like this matchup here for him. Again, I know I said that those are the last 2 guys at the wide receiver position, and maybe you're listening and you're wondering, well, John, why aren't you talking about guys like Jordan Whittington or Tutu Atwell? And obviously talked about both of those guys last week. I talked about both of them in the matchup show and their roster. Jordan Whittington, for example, he's available in 85% of Yahoo leagues. He's a guy that he came through again, but the only thing is that he suffered, it did look like he suffered an injury. It looks like a shoulder injury, they're saying. And then they're on bye in week 6. And then Cooper Kupp potentially comes back in week 7. So it's a situation where I'm not really sure what the role is going to be for these guys. And at the wide receiver position, unless like I'm in a deep league where I'm, there's not a lot of guys available to me on waivers. I'm not going to hold a guy like Jordan Whittington through the bye week, given all the situations around him, that Cooper Kupp might come back in week 7, that, he's dealing with a shoulder injury, don't know the full extent of it. Um, and again, just he can't help me in week 6, right? So I'm not necessarily, I might not add him again. Everybody's league is different, right? So like I have a league where I'm probably going to hold on to Jordan Whittington through the bye just because I don't, my like what am I pick? What am I? Who am I dropping Jordan Whittington for? Right? If I can drop a Jordan Whittington to pick up a Darnell Mooney or pick up a Jalen Tolbert or a Josh Downs, like yeah, I would do that. But that's not my situation. If that's your situation, then yeah, then I would make that move, right? Because those guys can help you this week. Jordan Whittington can't help you this week, and we don't know if he can help you next week, right? So that's the thought process there. And Tutu Atwell, similar thing, available in 81% of Yahoo leagues. Um, and he's a guy that I don't feel like people are running to the waiver wire to grab, although 10 targets in week 5. Was that game script dependent? Probably. But he's a guy that we've talked about having had these opportunities for a few weeks now. And nobody's been rushing to play him. So I doubt people are running to the waiver wire to add him to play him in week 6 because he can't help you in week 6. Maybe he has a role in week 7 because his role is different than Cooper Cup's. So when Cooper Cup comes back, maybe Tutu Atwell still has a role. But again, we'll just have to see there. So that's just my general thought process with Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell. If you guys are wondering why I'm not talking about either of those guys here. And then we only have one tight end today, Tucker Kraft. He broke the waiver wire essentially after scoring 2 touchdowns, a monster 66-yard touchdown. So he's not available, and he's not available in the majority of leagues. So yeah, Tucker Kraft only available in 38% of Yahoo leagues. So he probably would be, he would be the number 1 tight end. So but there was only really one tight end here that's under that threshold that I think is worth rostering ahead of week 6, and that is Tampa Bay tight end Cade Otton, available in 63% of Yahoo leagues. Otton has been more involved over the last few weeks in the Tampa Bay offense. He's seen at least 44 receiving yards over his last 3 games with at least 6 receptions in 2 of his last 3 games. Now faces off against the New Orleans defense, who coming into the week allowed the 8th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 matchups. That number is probably higher given what happened in Monday Night Football with Travis Kelce as well as Noah Gray, and then Juju Smith-Schuster, who basically operates as a tight end. Actually, that's another good one. Well, I don't mean to circle back there, but Cade Otton, obviously, definitely add him at the tight end position. Afraid to talk about Tyler Conklin because every time I talk about him in the waiver show, like nothing good ever happens. But he's a guy who's available 70% of Yahoo leagues. If you're desperate at tight end, he's seen at least 6 targets over his last 3 games. Has a matchup against Buffalo, who kind of middle of the road against the tight end position. So we'll obviously in the matchup show we'll talk more about some of the things here. So if he's a guy that I want, like I'm going to want to play because he seems to be a guy I talk about pretty frequently, then maybe we'll talk about that. But a guy that I do want to talk about is Kansas City wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. He's coming off his best game of the season. I mean, best game I think I've seen Juju Smith-Schuster play in a while, probably 2 years. But everyone was talking about who's going to take over the Rashee Rice role. And while I don't think Juju Smith-Schuster is capable of playing the Rashee Rice role to the full capacity, he had 7 receptions on 8 targets, 130 receiving yards. That was 20 PPR points. A lot of it came yards after the catch. He was wide open on some of his opportunities. And, obviously, we're not going to knock the guy for being wide open. But if he's going to operate some of the short area of the field type stuff and get the yards after catch plays that Rashee Rice was getting, I think Juju definitely is a guy that should have, should probably be rostered. Again, they're on bye in week 6. So, take that with a grain of salt, how you want to handle that. But they've got to, they come back, they have a matchup against San Francisco. So not one that, San Francisco is like middle of the pack against wide receivers. I'm not looking exactly at my notes right now, but, Juju Smith-Schuster, I think, might be worth an add. Again, I don't want to overstate what he did yesterday. A lot of it was he was wide open. Like it almost seemed like New Orleans at some points just forgot that he was on the roster, and he was just running through the defense just wide open and was able to, Mahomes was able to deliver him the football, and he was just, showed a little bit more juice after the catch than, I even probably thought that Juju still had in him. So, I think he's worth, a cursory look there, on in terms of, being added off waivers. If you can't get to some of these other guys like a Josh Downs or Darnell Mooney or even a Jalen Tolbert, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Is that he's not involved in this offense. This game was a flash in the pan, or he truly does take on the the Rashee Rice role here. So didn't mean to kind of jump out of order there, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster, because that game obviously happened last night, and I didn't update the notes to include him. So didn't want the show to go by without me mentioning him there. So all right, y'all, that is pretty much all I have today. Again, make sure you are tapped into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast. Wherever you may get your podcast, make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel. Make sure you tell your friends and your family. I get it if you don't want to tell your league mates, but you think about it, helps the show, helps me out. So if you appreciate what we do here every Tuesday and Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, we go live. Tuesday is the waiver show. Every Friday is the matchup show. Also, make sure you're following me on the social media platforms at @therealjonj_FF. You can find me on X as well as Instagram. There's a lot of Instagram content that I've been doing over these last since week one in terms of reels related to Thursday night football picks with player props as well as picks for the game, and then on later in the week there's always starts of the week. I'm thinking about bringing that back to the show. We'll see how that works out. I was trying something a little bit different here, but I definitely, if you want to see that, it's on Instagram. The reels are on Instagram. I'll make sure to put that going forward on X as well. I figured out how to do it last week. I just didn't want to just do the starts of the week and then not do the Thursday night picks. So starting this week, Thursday night picks will also go on X, as well as starts of the week will also go on X. So again, maybe we'll find a way to get that published here as well, whether it's as part of this show. But we'll see what happens there. So that being said, y'all, love you, appreciate you. Make sure again you're subscribed. I don't want to bang that into your heads, but it definitely helps the show and doesn't cost you anything to support the show. So would genuinely appreciate that. Without further ado, though, guys, I'm out of here. I will talk to you guys on Friday. Peace.